Hey everyone. Today's lecture represents kind of the start of a new chapter in our discussion of world religions. And so today we're going to be talking about a survey of Zoroastrianism. Oh, there we go. In our previous lectures, we discussed several world religions that are categorized as Eastern religions. And if you recall right, we defined what Eastern religions are as referring to a variety of religious traditions that originated in East, South, and Southeast Asia and are historically, culturally, and theologically distinct from those that originated elsewhere across the globe. And if you recall right from those lectures, we've looked at really two main categories or main subcategories of Eastern religions, and those are classified as Dharmaic religions or Indian religions, and then those that are classified collectively as East Asian religions, or sometimes just indigenous Asian religions. For those who fall into the Dharmic camp or the Indian religions camp, those were the religions of Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism, and Buddhism that we've discussed. And those that fall into the Eastern camp of religions were Confucianism and Taoism or Taoism, depending on your pronunciation, and Shinto. But today we're going to be switching gears here and we're going to be focusing our attention for this class as well as the remaining of the sessions concerning those religions that are categorized as Western religions. So, of course, what are Western religions? Well, Western religions refer to a variety of religious traditions that originate within Western cultures that are historically, culturally, and theologically distinct from other religions. But for our cases here, particularly those that we have classified as Eastern religions, meaning that these religious traditions that we will discuss now and going forward have developed quite distinctively different from those that we have already discussed. They will have completely different vocabulary. They will have completely different cosmology. They would have completely different theological concerns. And why these religions are treated separately from the likes of Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and Shintoism that we've already discussed in this class. And like our conversation with Eastern religions, there are several subcategories within the Western religions traditions. And for that, we will discuss the remaining part of this class, as well as the remaining part of this course. What we will cover are the subcategories of the Abrahamic religions, that's Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and Baha'i faith. We'll also discuss African religions, and today we're discussing ancient Iranian or Persian religions. And for our lecture today, we're going to be looking at an example, specific example of Iranian religions. But first, we need to discuss what are Iranian religions. Well, Iranian religions, you may also see another term inside textbooks. You might see Persian religions as well. But Iranian religions refer to a grouping of religious movements that had originated on the Iranian plateau. Now, this Iranian plateau, also sometimes known in textbooks as the Persian plateau, is situated between the Zagros Mountains in the west of the country, uh, uh, the Caspian Sea and the Kopet Dagh to the north, as well as the Armenian highlands and the Caucasus Mountains to the northwest, the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf to the south, as you can see on this map here, as well as the Indian subcontinent to the east. So this really consists of the Iranian plateau is largely the modern day country of Iran, but it also consists of parts of Armenia, parts of Iraq, parts of Turkey, parts of Turkmenistan, parts of Afghanistan, parts of Azerbaijan, and parts of Pakistan. So it's not fair to say a Middle Eastern country, but it's more or less a Central Asian country, but on the far western side of the Central Asian country. So it's this large plateau that's beyond the modern day country of Iran, but it includes people groups who inhabited other cultures that we have today, other nation states as we have today. And these religious traditions, which fall under this categorization, refer to the various beliefs, activities, and cultures and events of these people groups who are linked to the ancestral Persians or the ancestral Iranians who have emerged from this geographical region on the globe. So religions that fall into this category of Iranian or Iranian religions or Persian religions, they would be religions today like Yazidism or the Druze religion or the Ustadid religion. Baha'i faith would also be included in this, mainly because of geographic locations, but however, it generally falls into the subset of Abrahamic religions. But we're also going to be covering it as an example of a new age or a new religious movement that have emerged in the last 200 years. But it also includes some various dead religions that we are not going to talk about in this course, but you might see in courses on world history, on geography, other religious courses, anthropology courses, if you take here in your current college courses. So those dead religions, meaning religions that no longer exist anymore today, but had once existed and thrived for several centuries. Some of the dead religions within the Iranian religious traditions would be something like Manichaeism, that we'll talk about later in this lecture, and Mithraism, that was a very popular religion during the heydays of the Roman Empire that originated in ancient Persia and permeated throughout the Roman Empire. But for today's religion, we're going to be focusing only on one of these religions, one of these Iranian religions, and so that is going to be the religion of Zoroastrianism. So, like always within our courses, we always give a little bit of basic facts about the religion that we are going to discuss in this class. And so, what is Zoroastrianism? Many of you probably have never heard of this religion, and this is why I wanted to talk about it. So, Zoroastrianism, really quickly, if we could give a very succinct definition of what Zoroastrian is, Zoroastrianism, or sometimes referred to as Mazdaism, we'll talk about that here in a little bit, but Zoroastrianism is one of the world's oldest organized and continually practiced religion in the world today. This religion has roots that date back as far as, at least recorded history, as far back as the second millennium BCE. So as old, if not older, than the pyramids themselves. So it's a very old religion that has continued and is continually practiced to this day. Zoroastrianism, uh, although it shares, let me back up a little bit. Zoroastrianism shares similar ancestral characteristics with that of Hinduism, in which there are some cultural and linguistic parallels that why we can see that some of the same origins and some of the same roots about this religion have parallels. That you'll see various terms and terminologies found within the old Vedic religion of Zoroastrianism. Or excuse me, the old Vedic religion of Hinduism, you see those same words, terminologies, and parallelisms within Hinduism. So Zoroastrianism sometimes gets loosely defined as an Eastern religion, and we'll talk about the reason why we're not classifying it as an Eastern religion, but considering it a Western religion for very particular reasons. But it does share some similarities with Hinduism, particularly its origins, why it's one of the oldest and continually functioning world religions that we have today. Um, but even though Zoroastrianism is an Iranian or Iranian Persian religion, it is not to be confused with Islam. It is not to be confused with Baha'i faith, which also originated in Iran and is commonly practiced in the country of Iran today, as are those other religions. It is not the same. It is a completely different religion. Zoroastrianism is completely different from these two-sided, Islam and Baha'i faith in Iran. It's not the same religion, nor is it classified as a Abrahamic religion. Um, Nor does it have any kind of really strong relationships to this religion or to those religions of the West, Abrahamic religions. However, Zoroastrianism, the reason why we classify it as a Western religion as opposed to an Eastern religion, in light of its geographical origins, its footprints, as well as its strong similarities to Hinduism, is that it garners this Western religious categorization due to its underlying influences upon Western religions and Western cultures. So when we talk about what did some of the teachings of Zoroastrianism is, they're going to sound very, very similar to that of Christianity, that of Judaism, that of Islam. You're also going to see some influences being passed along to Islam that originated in Zoroastrianism. So this is why that categorization of a Western religion is not so much geographical, but it's rather because it's so fundamental in the developments of these other religions in the West, and these Abrahamic religions. Zoroastrianism is based on the teachings of the ancient Persian prophet um, Zarathustra. Zarathustra, who's better known by his Greek name, which is easier to pronounce, Zoroaster. And this is where you get the name Zoroastrianism comes from. Zoroastrian is an individual that is believed to have lived sometime between 150 BC or 100 or excuse me 1500 BCE to 500 BCE. We're not sure when they began, but we'll talk about that and what's the reason for that uncertainty. But however, Zoroastrianism is considered a founder religion because of its influences by its most prominent prophet, that of Zoroaster. Zoroastrianism is also can be classified as a kind of what it is that it can be classified also as a dualistic cosmology. Now we haven't seen this term too much in our class. Maybe the closest that we have is that of Jainism, but Zoroastrianism teaches a dualistic cosmology, or sometimes just simplified as a dualism, which what dualism means, or dualistic cosmology means, is that it's a moral and spiritual belief that two fundamental concepts exist in the universe and in nature, and that these two fundamental concepts are often at opposite ends of each other and consistently opposing each other's. So, in scientific principles, you would almost consider um, Newton's laws of motion that if there's an action, there must be an equal and opposite reaction. And so this is kind of what cosmology is that there is a one fundamental force in the universe as well as there's another, its opposite force in the universe. And so this often gets simplified in philosophical and religious terms as just simply being good versus evil. And Zoroastrianism is really all about that, and we'll discuss more as we progress in this lecture. Zoroastrianism's dualism operates within a framework of a soft monotheistic religion. And soft monotheism, you probably already know what monotheism is, but what is soft monotheism? Um, we'll get to that more when we get to Christianity, but for our purposes here, a soft monotheism is that it believes in one singular deity, but also kind of acknowledges lesser spirits. They're not equal to or greater than the main deity, but they do believe in other spirits. They do believe in other versions or emanations of the singular source. So Christianity believes in a trinity. That that example is that of a soft monotheism. It doesn't believe in one God, but believes in three in one. As you'll see, Zoroastrianism really believes in two cosmic forces. It exalts an uncreated, benevolent super being, or supreme being, known as Ahura Mazda, that we'll talk more about later in this lecture. But Ahura Mazda, who in Zoroastrianism is considered to be in this internal struggle with over the universe as well as the world itself and over humanity as well, with his exact counterpart, that of Angra Manu, who is the manifestation of evil, who is the manifestation of destruction, and who is really Ahura Mazda's main ag, what's the word? Antagonist. Yeah, that's the word. Its main antagonist throughout Zoroastrian theology, scriptures, and belief systems. The best equivalent that we have is that Ahura Mazda is God within Christianity, and Angra Manu is that of the devil in Christianity. So think of those two simple dichotomies. Again, think of this dualism. And as another aspect of this dualism is the internal struggle that is played out and prophesized in eschatological framework in which that good will eventually triumph over evil in an apocalyptic conquest at the end of days, at the end of time. This kind of sounds familiar to many of you who might have professed beliefs in Christianity or professed beliefs in Islam. Sounds very similar of a prophesized eschatological apocalyptic end times when good will finally triumph over evil and evil will be judged and evil will be defeated and good will eventually reign over everything, but at the end of days, at the end of time. You can see why, again, Zoroastrianism has this influence over Abrahamic religions and thus is sometimes classified as a Western religion. As previously indicated, while Zoroastrianism is recognized as one of the world's oldest and organized religion, it is also forgotten that the religion of Zoroastrianism is still being practiced today, but as a minority religion. And so, very briefly, what a minority religion is that it is a religion held by, practiced by a significant minority of the population within a specific country or within a specific region, and who are historically subjugated to religious intolerance, if not downright religious persecution. As of 2019, estimates show that there are some 200,000 Zoroastrians left on the world today who actively practice their faith traditions. And the main reason is because it's so small, is because of their minority status. And roughly half of this figure resides really in just two countries, as you can see here on the map. Those two countries being Iran and being India. The largest of the populations of Zoroastrians being in India, a community that's around 70,000 people in India and in parts of Pakistan. And the other significant population is about over 25,000 Zoroastrians still live and reside in Iran today. But however, that number is significantly dwindling year by year because of the oppressive nature of the Iranian government. Other places with significant populations of Zoroastrian people are the Kurdish occupied territories of Iraq and Turkey, which is around 15,000 Zoroastrians live in those regions, as well as in the United States. There's estimate around 14,000 Zoroastrians live in the United States, practice their religion in the United States. Lesser countries being that of Uzbekistan, around 7,000, Canada, around 6,000, and the UK, which is less than 5,000 Zoroastrians. So you can see it's a religion that is on the decline. Another significant fact about this religion and its community is that the religion is on decline. Well, yeah, I guess, yeah, it is on the decline because of persecution. And we'll talk about this more towards the end of the lecture, but I guess it is important for me to talk about it here because in some countries in which they reside, particularly Muslim dominated areas of, of the globe, like Iran and Iraq and Turkey, is that in these countries Zoroastrianism is a persecuted religion, despite the fact that within Islam, Zoroastrian and people who practice Zoroastrianism are considered to be what is an Islamic term as al-Kitab, which translated from the Arabic means people of the book, meaning a revealed religion. And so we'll talk about more within that status, but I want to mention it here that within Islam, people who are classified and considered as part of the al-Kitab are to be a protected status known in Islam as the dhimmi, who is this protective status reserved for non-Muslims within the religion and within the influence of Islam. And according to the Quran itself, these people of the book are identified as Jews, as Christians, and as Zoroastrianism, because at one time Zoroastrianism was a dominant religious force within the Middle East. And we'll talk about why later. And so if they were to be seen early on in the traditions of Islam, they were to be seen as a protected status group, and they were to be afforded protection as because they shared within the prophetic tradition and the prophetic nature. So for the dhimmi is also referred to as a state obligation under Sharia law to protect non-Muslim life and to protect non-Muslim property, as well as these non-Muslims are to experience religious freedom, meaning they can practice their religion openly without being persecuted in exchange for their loyalty to the state as well as a payment of the jizya tax. Sometimes that is not happening in these countries. And so why Zoroastrianism is being a persecuted religion. That's the last bit I want to say on that because we'll talk about more towards the end of this lecture. Finally, Zoroastrianism can be classified as an ethno-religion and is generally regarded as such and regarded as a founder religion as well. For its classification as an ethno-religion, Zoroastrians are ethnically Iranian, ethnically Persian. Even Zoroastrians who live in India are called in India by the term Parsi, which is Sanskrit for Persian, or they're called Irani, uh, which identifies who they are, that they are ethnically from Iran. That Zoroastrians in Iran, in India have their own language, have their own culture that is distinct from other communities in India, but are more parallel to that of Iran. They are ethnically Iranian and represent Iranians who have migrated to the India subcontinent during the 10th and later centuries due to religious persecutions. However, with the prominence of Shia Islam in Iran, Iranian traditions and because of Iranian demographics favor Shia Islam, Zoroastrianism does not fully classify as a true ethno-religion, as, for example, like Judaism, where Jews are both ethnically a Jewish identity as well as Jews being a religious identity. So again, because of the popularity of Shiaism, it's not truly a ethnic religion. And lastly, because Zoroastrianism also can be classified as a founder religion, who both scholarship and traditions credit Zoroaster as its spiritual founder. However, historians and scholars have demonstrated that the roots of Zoroastrianism are thought to lie in a common ancient Persian religious system that predates many of the traditions that are associated with Zoroaster and the Zoroastrianism. And so the religious traditions that we generally tend to associate with the teachings of Zoroaster may perhaps pre, predate his existence. So it has led many religious scholars and historians to classify Zoroastrianism not so much as a founder religion, but rather to put him in the same parallels of that, in the same classifications or the same categorizations as that with Confucius, who claimed that he was no inventor of a new religious tradition or a new philosophical tradition, but rather that he claimed he was a preserver of forgotten knowledge and forgotten truths of the past. That may be the case with Zoroastrianism, and we'll see later why is that, because some of his teachings do have a pre-existence with earlier ancient Iranian religions that we'll talk about. Or Zoroastrian functions very similarly to that of Lao Tse or Lao Tzu within the Taoist traditions. As if you recall from our conversations about Taoism, that because of his biographical story, many historians and scholars actually doubt he was even a real person, but rather that Lao Tse maybe exists as a fictional character that was invented and that arose because there was a need for explanation, a need for origin concerning the religious traditions by later generations to understand how did our traditions begin. Zoroastrianism may function this very much the same way, that he could be a fictitious character because it's really we don't know much about this person. We don't have concrete dates about his existence. And again, much of his teaching predates his own traditions. So he could be this fictional character that was invented by later historians and later generations in need of an origin story, in need of a point of creation. So, enough about the basic facts concerning Zoroastrianism. I think now it's important for us to transition to talking about the founder of the religion, or the perceived founder of the religion, who is Zarathustra, or Zoroaster. So, similarly to many of the founders of these world religions that we have discussed in this course, Zoroaster has numerous traditional accounts concerning his activities, yet there are very few historical records that exist outside of the religion concerning Zoroaster or paint an accurate picture about this individual. Therefore, because of that, there really isn't any scholarly traditions or any scholarly consensus, is really the better word, concerning when Zoroastrian lived or if he even existed at all. The most popular example is that, well, some scholars using linguistic and socio-cultural evidence within the writings that are claimed to be attributed to Zoroaster suggest a date somewhere between 1700 and 1000 BCE. The basis of this theory is primarily on the linguistic similarities between the old languages of the written traditions of Zoroastrianism, the language that they use is called Avestan, Avstan, Avestan, that this old language that's attributed in the writings that are written in this old language that are attributed to Zoroastrianism have significant linguistic and cultural parallels to Old Sanskrit, the language of ancient India, and the language of the Rig Vedas, which are the oldest parts of the religious traditions of Hinduism, of the old Vedic religion. And scholars date the composition of the Vedas, the Rig Vedas, somewhere between 1700 and 1100 BCE. Because again, these texts do show a common ancestry because of significant linguistic parallels. Sometimes they're using the exact same words to describe things. They have similar practices that are being described, cultural significance. And two, the Aryans were traditionally thought and believed to have emerged traditionally from the Iranian plateau. So again, leading further credence to this belief about the connections between Sanskrit and the language of Zoroaster. Other scholars, however, date Zoroastrian's activities to the 5th or 6th century BCE as being either contemporaries of either the great Persian king Cyrus the Great or the other Darius the First, who you can see of his dates of when they've reigned. So somewhere either contemporary before, meaning living before Cyrus the Great or living before Darius the First. We're really not sure when. But the reason this evidence gets often suggested is that both Cyrus the Great, but even more specifically, King Darius the First, were noted avid followers of Zoroastrianism. Particularly Darius the First is the most avid of all the Persian kings who followed Zoroastrian practices, who built temples to Zoroastrian practices, and really pushed for its religion to spread during his time. So it may be that that's just why scholars believe it, is because it's so close to the originality. This inspiration that happens because the founder of the prophet was here. Um, However, many scholars are not alone with, well, let me rephrase this. Modern scholars today are not alone with their speculations concerning the origins of Zoroaster as well as the origins of the religion. The dating of Zoroaster's activities and even the activities of his life was the subject of many speculations of the ancient Greeks and ancient Roman historians of the period. And with even within their traditions between Greeks and Romans, there's really no clear consensus as to when Zoroastrian began prophesying. When did he emerge? Some Greek historians like Zethastus and Aristotle, Eurypymus, as Exodius, they all date Zoroaster's activities in his life to being 6,000 years before the invasion of Xerxes the First, his invasion into mainland Greece, which occurred sometime around 480 BCE. So really, pretty much 6,400 years ago, or 6,400 BCE is when Aristotle, when Xasthus, all talked about their speculations of when Zoroastrian lived. Dionysius dates Zoroaster instead to the period of the Trojan War, so sometime between 1194 1184 BCE is when the Trojan War is believed to have happened. The great Pliny the Elder dates Zoroastrianism to 5,000 years after or before the death of Plato. So Plato died around 347 BCE, so around 5,000 BCE is to believe when um, Zoroastrian was active. In truth, no one knows. However, traditional scholarship has the activities of Zoroastrian being contemporaneous with the reigns of either King Cyrus the Great or Darius the First, and that is what is the traditional view. And and the other reason for that is because the rise of Zoroastrianism also parallels similar world trends that were going on of new religious movements all emerging around the 6th century BCE. If you look at that, there's significant parallels that if Zoroastrianism emerges in around the 6th century, we also see in India Buddhism emerging, Jainism emerging, in ancient China Lao Tse and Confucius emerging are all around 6th century BCE. So people think of, well, if it's happening around this time, it must have also been happening, this kind of religious revivalism that was going on in the ancient world, and this is an evidence of that. We're not sure, but all I can say is that this is the traditional view that Zoroastrian, his life is around sometime around the beginning of Cyrus the Great's reign, if not prior to, or that of King Darius the First. So for Zarathustra, his name comes from an old Persian language called Avestan, which is the language of the ancient text of the Zoroastrian religion and of the ancient Persian people before it changed to Farsi. Um, uh, his name, Zarathustra, his name means in Avestan basically old camel or one who desires camels. So it's not a very flattering name if it was that Zoroaster was in fact a fictitious character. So this has led many scholars to believe, well, this isn't a really kind name. It's a very believable name, very common, possibly common name. So thus, it led a lot of historians and anthropologists to believe that Zoroaster was actually probably a real person as opposed to a fictitious person. And so the birthplace of Zoroaster is still largely unknown. However, two traditional places have been associated with his birth, that of Ariana in modern day Turkmenistan, or Badakhshan in modern day Afghanistan, has been the traditional birthplaces associated with Zoroastrianism. However, we really don't know. Zoroaster is also recorded to be the son of Purushash, let me remember how to say his name. Parushashpa. Yeah, Parushashpa and Dugdao, which both of their names are really based on nomadic cultures within the Avestan language. Like basically, his father meant a man who owns a gray horse. And his mother's name meant milkmaid, and so possibly referring to their occupation. So again, very historical names as possibly, or that it points to the origins, that Zoroastrian's origins were that of a very nomadic people who lived on the high steppes, plains of Central Asia. According to traditions, Zoroaster was trained as a priest starting at the age of 7, and that once he became at the age of 15, he became his local village or his local tribe's main priest. That would oversee the traditions and the rituals that were associated with their people. The religion that Zoroaster was trained in as a priest is what scholarship calls ancient Iranian religions, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. But however, at the age of 20, we do know that Zoroaster left his family village and traveled throughout the region, performing his priestly duties to the various people groups within the ancient kingdom of Persia. So now, very quickly, I want to talk about this ancient Iranian religion. What is that? Ancient Iranian religion refers to the ancient beliefs and practices of the Iranian people prior to the rise of Zoroastrianism, and is really closely associated to the old Vedic religion of ancient India, to some extent worshiping the same gods as those in India did, but had slight different names, but had very similar characteristics, if as well as very similar stories and origins about them. The central belief of the ancient Iranian religion was in a pantheon of divine beings who were divided into two major groups. There were those deities who were known as the Devayas, and the Aururas. So the Devayas, Daivas, and the Aururas, the Ahuras. The Devayas were translated as meaning heavenly ones, but these divinities uh, were designed to promote not heavenly things, but chaotic things, hellish things. They were divinities who promoted chaos and disorder. That term Devayas would also be later translated by Christian communities and be used for demons and devils. It's the same etymological word. The Ahuras, instead, which means Lord and Avestan, were considered noble sovereign deities that, instead of promoting chaos, they promoted and maintained order. So again, you can see this dichotomy already existing among the communities here of Zoroastrianism. And they are similar to what we see in ancient Persia, or excuse me, in ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, and ancient India. The Iranian religions did believe in a wide host of pantheons of gods and goddesses. The chief of the Iranian pantheon was that of Ahura Mazda, who was viewed as the sky father, similarly to Zeus or Idra in the ancient Vedic religion. And for the Iranians, Ahura Mazda was viewed as the creator god of the ancient Iranian mythology. Hence, now you can see why some scholars question Zoroastrian status as a founder of the religion, since there was a pre-existence of Ahura Mazda within the Iranian traditions. Other deities of importance would be that of Mithra, who is seen as the god of light, Varga, no, not Varga, uh, Vrathragana, who is the god of war. Ardiva Shura was the goddess of waters and rivers, and Rashnu, who was the god of judgment and would be the divine judge of humanity at the end of time. Followers of ancient Iranian religion practiced a variety of rituals, including fire sacrifices, prayers, and they also believed in a system of eternal rewards and punishment in the afterlife, all elements that would be very commonplace within Zoroastrianism. So, again, giving further credence to people doubting that Zoroastrian is so much the founder of this religion, but rather that he should be considered similarly to that of Confucianism as a preserver of the traditions, or just a reinterpreter of the traditions in a newer light. Anyhow, the ancient Iranian religion began to decline and more like really be absorbed in the 6th century BCE with the rise of Zoroastrianism. And so now back to our main episode here of Zoroastrianism. Oh, come on. There we go. According to Zoroastrian traditions, at the age of 30, Zoroaster experienced a revelation. He experienced during one of the spring festivals that had occurred within the ancient Iranian traditions, and that he had experienced it like so many of our religious founders on the banks of a river. In his revelation, Zoroaster saw a shining being who would later reveal himself to be Vuhumana, who is not Ahura Mazda, but rather is a servant of Ahura Mazda, that he is one of the emanations of Ahura Mazda, and he's considered one of the divine incarnation of good purposes of our good messengers, aka an angel. And so it was said, according to Zoroastrian traditions, that this angel, Vaumana, taught Zoroastrian about Ahura Mazda, about Angra and and the opposing concepts of Asha, which are order, and Druji, which is deception, which are the two things that make the world in this chaotic state. Again, an angel speaking to a prophet on the behalf of a god, you'll see similar parallels throughout the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Quran. Similar stories of that of the prophet Muhammad as well, that he had a revelation from the angel Gabriel on behalf of Allah. So again, you can see these parallels here. It was said that after he received this revelation, Zoroastrian dedicated the rest of his life to teaching people about the truths of the world and teaching them about um, the ways to seek order, asha, and to avoid druji. And at the age of 42, Zoroaster preached his new revelation before the king and queen of the ancient Persian kingdom, who believed his message and famously converted to this new way of thinking, this new religion that Zoroastrian was the founder of. And Zoroaster would then go on to continue to foster his small religious community throughout the ancient Persian kingdom until he died at the age of 77. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, it was Herodotus that argues that this king, King Vishtaspa, is to be identified as the father of Darius the First. Again, we're not sure if that's true or not, but this you can see the traditional beliefs that are here. It's Herodotus's really identification that Zoroastrian traditions and Zoroastrian traditional scholarships have really come to embrace and has been the default position concerning the origins of this religion and of these traditions. So now we know a little bit about Zoroaster. It's important for us to now migrate to talk about what did Zoroastrian teach. So at the heart of Zoroastrian teachings is found two primary books, the Avesta and the Gatha, both written in the ancient Persian language of Old Avestan. The Avesta is primarily a collection of writings from Zoroastrianism and consists of a collection of 21 books. The principal book within this collection is what is known as Yasna, which lays out the ritual practices of Zoroastrianism today. The Avesta is a valuable, extremely valuable source of information concerning the history, the ancient histories, and the beliefs of not only Zoroastrianism, but as well as the ancient Iranian people today. So it's a very much a treasured book that is studied significantly and is also studied by Hindu scholars because of the Aryan theory, because of their strong parallels between the Avesta, what is found in the Avesta, as well as what is found in the Rig Veda. The Avesta, again, is this. It composes of beautiful and poetic collections of texts that are very much admired by scholars. But however, the Avesta is a book that is not believed to have been written, or nor is it attributed to Zoroaster. Rather, this book predates him. And many believe within Zoroastrianism that this book has an eternal origin before it was written down. So a very similar claim that we'll see with the Torah in Judaism and to some extent with the Quran in Islam. That even though it was written down at a later point, it had a pre-existence, an eternal pre-existence with the main deity. The Gatha is a collection of 17 hymns, traditionally that is accredited to Zoroaster, and who is believed to be the composer of this book. The Gathas are full of vivid imagery and metaphors. They use several different types of poetic devices, such as repetition, parallelisms, that are often studied as sources of literary theory and literary devices. And the Gathas are used as the basis of Zoroastrian theology as well as cosmology. Zoroaster taught that there is but one universal, transcendent, all good, and uncreated supreme creator deity called Ahura Mazda, which means in Avesta, wise Lord. Zoroaster claims that Ahura Mazda is an omniscient, which is just Latin meaning all-knowing, and he is omniscient and omnibenevolent, which is Latin meaning all-loving, all-kindness. But however, unlike in traditional strong monotheistic religions like Islam, like Christianity, Zoroaster taught that God, Ahura Mazda, unlike the God of Abraham, is not omnipotent, meaning that he is not all powerful. So this is something different that as an explanation of why is there evil in the world, it's because Zoroastrians believe that their God is not all powerful. He's all knowing, he is all loving, but he's not all powerful. Ahura Mazda, because of his not all powerfulness, Ahura Mazda is noted as working through emanations of himself that are known as Amisha Sepita, Sepnita. So it's Amishna, Amsha, Subnipta, Spenta, Amesha Sanipta. So these emanations from in him. So really quickly, emanations, what does that mean? Emanationism is this really transcendent principle that we'll see here later again in our next when we talk about African religions with the Yoruba religion. Emanations is a transcendent principle from which everything is derived from, as opposed to direct creationism, where the universe is created by a sentient God who separates creation. So it's not this direct creation, but it's a creation through something else. And it's not materialism, which evolutionism that posits there's no underlying ontological being, rather that the physical world emanated from created matter naturally. So materialism. It's not those things, but that emanation is basically that God created the universe through agents of himself. So think of a CEO, or think of an architect. An architect draws up the blueprints, but the architect doesn't build. Rather, it's the builders that do the work of the architect. So within Zoroastrianism, Ahura Mazda is the grand architect, and that his workers, the Amesha Sepnita, are his builders, his emanations. The Amesha Senepta, which means holy immortal ones, are a group of 7 entities that emanate out of Ahura Mazda, through whom all subsequent creation was then accomplished by. So it's through Ahura Mazda, but through these emanations of Ahura Mazda that the world was created. Zoroastrianism preaches that Asha is the main spiritual force that comes from Ahura Mazda and represents the cosmic order that is to be established, the law of nature, for example. That everything was designed to be good and perfect and orderly. The sun is to rise, the sun is to set, plants are to grow and to prosper and be bountiful. Bees are supposed to emerge and work and fill the honey and then thus create cross pollination. Everything works to perfected order. However, Zoroastrian also taught that there is an antithesis to this order that exists in the universe: chaos, or druji. Chaos in Zoroastrianism is known as druji, and represents falsehood, represents disorder. Zoroaster preached that these two cosmic forces were involved in an eternal conflict that involves all of creation. That is an explanation of why is there evil in this world. It's because there's a cosmic battle going on behind the scenes that you might not be aware of, but that you are a part of. And that humanity is at the core of this struggle, and that humans have an active role to play within this eternal conflict, this cosmic conflict. In Zoroastrian traditions, Druji comes from the antithesis, from the protagonist in this story, or no, the antagonist, sorry, not the protagonist, but the antagonist of this story, Angra Mani. or Manu, sorry, Manu, Angra Manu, who is the main adversary force to Aru Mazda. Assisting Angri Manu are the demons, the devas, who are described as, who are demons and who work to deceive humankind. However, Zoroaster describes these devas as, quote, wrong gods or false gods that should be rejected. So things like greed, things like money, Zoroaster would also consider it as elements of false gods. Maybe in Christianity and in Judaism and Islam, we would say these are idols. Thou shalt not have any idols before God. These druji are constitutes also within Zoroastrianism as idols. According to Zoroastrian, Angri Menu and his forces, and Aru Mazda and his forces will battle for or will battle and will continue to battle and are battling now and will battle into the future for possession of what is known as Caravana, Kavuvana, which is understood as a divine power or divine glory which aids their governance in the universe, which helps them create order or what helps them to create chaos. And that's what they're fighting for. Now, for Zoroastrian creation myths, Zoroastrians believed that Ahura Mazda existed as a pure light and as the embodiment of goodness, while Angra Mainyu exists as darkness and as the embodiment of ignorance. Both divine beings existed independently of each other for all time, and they manifested contrary substances. Ahura Mazda first manifested the seven emanations of himself, the Amesha Sapientes, who would support him and who would go about doing the beneficial work of creation, creating good things in this world, creating humans to have life and to functions. However, Angara Manu would manifest his devas, who would work to underwork what Ahura Mazda and his emanations are doing in this world. So you have that cosmic tug of war that is going on between the forces of good and the forces of evil. Ahura Mazda would then create the material and the visible world in order to trap evil underground. This is how the creation world or the creation mythology works, is that the reason why Ahura Mazda created the world was that he needed a place to trap evil underneath. The Zoroastrians see the created universe as half circles with three layers: the spiritual world above, the physical world here on earth, and the evil world below that is trapped underground. Then Ahura Mazda would go on to create two human beings, the archetypal human beings, Garumara, Gayomar and Gavavedota, who are the archetypical male and female, Adam and Eve here, in order to help Ahura Mazda in his mission to ensnare evil, to keep chaos at bay, to keep it underground, to keep the growing darkness out of the world. But however, the world broke. The creation myth teaches that there was a giant earthquake and a fissure opened in the earth like a volcano, and out erupted evil into this world. And so why the world is so broken is that basically an earthquake had happened, a massive earthquake had happened that opened up the world and opened up the earth, that allowed evil to escape its prison underneath, its hell underneath. And so now chaos runs rampant, chaos runs free. But however, Ura Mazda can keep it at bay, but it needs humanity. Because again, Ura Mazda is not an omnipotent being, it's not an all powerful being. He needs humanity to help him. Finally, according to Zoroastrian cosmology, Ahura Mazda will ultimately triumph in the end. Good will ultimately triumph over evil. Ahura Mazda will ultimately triumph over Angry Manu. Ahura Mazda will ultimately prevail over this evil, at which point, in reality, the world would undergo a cosmic renovation, which in Zoroastrianism is known as Frashol Kriti, Frashol Kriti, which is the restoration at the end of days. And according to Zoroastrian, at the end of time, in order to bring this about, there will appear a savior-like figure who is known as Sau Sata, whose name means the one who brings benefit, will come at a future unknown date and will bring about the restoration, the final restoration of the universe, and that will help destroy evil and trap it back into hell, and that will bring about the original creation of earth that was broken at one time. Sort of like a restoration of the Garden of Eden in the story of Revelation. And that everything, at the end of things, Zoroastrian teaches that everything will be perfect again. Everything will be back in unity. That we'll have order again as Ahura Mazda originally intended. And according to Zoroastrian traditions, it is this savior, Sao Shatan, yes, Shao Shatan, will lead humanity in a final battle against evil, in which restoration will be achieved. The world will be made perfect again, and humanity will be made immortal once again. And the cause of evil and of disorder will eventually disappear forever. And that in this final renovation, this Frash o Krenti, all creation, even the souls of the dead that were initially banished to or chose to descend into darkness, will be resurrected and will be reunited with Ahura Mazda in this kind of kingdom, this heavenly kingdom on earth that will come to earth, known as Krasta Verara. And again, everyone will be resurrected. But until this apocalyptic time, Zoroaster implores humanity to participate in this cosmic battle here and now. He actually outlines two requirements for believers to do. Here on the slide, I only outline one of these, but the second one technically involves practices. But one way in which humans are to participate in this cosmic battle, according to Zoroaster, is that they are to follow what is known as the threefold path of Asha. And so the threefold path of Asha is known in these three words that summarize everything is Humata, Huksta, Huvarshata, or translated in English as having good thoughts, saying good words, and doing good deeds. So that within Zoroastrianism, Zoroastrian teaches the way to combat evil is to have good ethics, to active and ethically participate in life by performing good deeds, by having good thoughts, and saying good words. And these things are what is necessary to ensure that there is happiness, that there is order, And that by doing these things, you are actively keeping chaos and disorder at bay. This active participation is a central element in Zoroastrian's teachings and his concept of free will. Zoroastrian defines life as a temporary state in which a mortal is expected to actively participate in the battle between Asha and Druji. That is actually what free will is. Free will is a battle, and a battle, and within this battle, you have a choice. As humans, we have to choose every day if we're going to actively participate in the battle for goodness and to seeing that goodness wins the day, or that you allow evil to take root or to do evil in our actions. And so within Zoroastrianism, what it means to be a good Zoroastrian is to live a good life. And that life as a Zoroastrian is all about choosing the right path. And the right path starts with having good words, or good thoughts in your mind. Speaking only good words to your fellow man, to your family, to your lover, and having good deeds for your coworkers, for the strangers that you meet out in the streets. Prior to our birth, Zoroastrian taught that we exist as what he called Yorvan, which means soul in Avestan, and that our soul has been united with a personal spirit with Aru Mazda, this personal spirit that's called um, Freyvashi, which is a piece, which is actually a physical piece of Aruma's spirit. Sometimes it's known as the spark. And so this similar concept is also seen in Judaism and Kabbalah, mystical forms of Judaism, as well as in mystical forms of Islam, Sufism. They get this from Zoroastrianism, that we have within ourselves this divine spark. And what this means is that for Zoroastrians, they believe that all of humanity is inherently good, and that we only choose to do evil, that we choose to be corrupt, but we have it within our nature, within ourselves, to be good. That thus, in order to be a Zoroastrian, is to go back to your original self, in a sense. Be who you are. You are a good person. You have the power to do good within yourself. And so Zoroastrian taught that during the life of a given individual, the Freishi acts as a source of inspiration to help us to do and perform good actions, as the source of spiritual protection from evil. That when we're doing good work, evil can't take root. If we're saying good things, if we're acting in good kindness towards each other, then evil cannot exist. And that is and Zoroastrian also taught that our ancestors and heroes of the past, that their Freishi spirit can be called upon to aid the living as well. That your father, that your grandfather, or a person that you admire, this holy man, that his Freja can be called upon to help you. So almost a similar concept of sainthood here, or ancestral worship here. There's also a heavily emphasis is put on practicing charity within Zoroastrian traditions, in which Zoroaster himself preached that the practice of giving charity regularly, giving money, giving food, giving aid to those in need, regularly keeps one's soul aligned with order, with Asha, and thus helps to spread happiness and order to other people. Zoroastrian was also one of the earliest proponents of women's rights through religion. constantly advocating within the religion that women have equal access to God, equal access to being sources of good as well, that they have a part to play in this battle as well. So that's one way, doing the threefold path of Ashai. But there is also a second way to battle evil and the darkness, and that way is through fire and light, which is associated with the fire sacrifices and the ritual practices that we will now unpack here. So now we're going to talk about the rituals and practices of Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrian rituals and practices are designed to promote purity and goodness in the lives of their followers, as well as to encourage their followers to fight against evil. They are also a way for Zoroastrians to connect themselves with Ahura Mazda and to celebrate the important events in their lives. At the heart of Zoroastrian practices are their fire temples. Now, a fire temple, also known as an agari, as you can see in here, an agari, are places of worship for Zoroastrianism, and that they're places that are dedicated to Ahura Mazda, the supreme being in Zoroastrianism. And they are seen as symbols of purity and of light. Fire temples are typically built in a simple functionary style. They have a central fire altar, which is kept burning continuously every single day, at every hour of the day, 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. The fires of the fire temple stay burnt. Because the reason for that is because the fire is considered a sacred symbol. It is considered the embodiment, to some extent, of Ahura Mazda amongst the myths of the Zoroastrians. And that they use this fire in a variety of rituals. Zoroastrians believe that the fire is pure and a cleansing element, and that they use it to symbolize the light of truth and the light of knowledge that combats evil and darkness and disorder. They also believe that fire is a powerful force that helps to ward off evil spirits in their community and their midst. So thus why the fire is constantly burned is because it's constantly keeping evil away. Finally, the fire temples are important places of Zoroastrian worship, and they are symbols of their faith. They are also places where Zoroastrians can come together to pray, to learn about their faith, and to connect within their communities. So they're a central heart of their traditions. And at the heart of the Zoroastrian fire temple are the fire sacrifices. Now, the fire sacrifices are rituals in Zoroastrianism that involves offering um, uh, mostly fire, or sorry, mostly flowers, sometimes food, sometimes water, but mostly it involves the offering of wood to keep the fire burning. So it's not an animal sacrifice, it's something much different. But people will bring wood, they'll bring um, pieces of wood. They would bring flowers, branches, things like that, palm branches to keep the fire going. And so they're offering these pieces of wood, these fire, as sacrifices, and sacrifice is a way of showing reverence to Ahura Mazda. The fire sacrifices are performed by priests in the fire temple, and the priest will first purify the fire by sprinkling it with water and reciting prayers, and then the priest will offer the sacrifice of the person to the fire, that of adding more fire to the wood in a very ritualized way. After the sacrifice is offered, the priest will then recite more prayers, and prayers are ways of asking Ahura Mazda to bless and to protect the community as well as the individual. This fire sacrifice for the Zoroastrians is what is known as Ashta-Baram, the eternal and the victorious fire. Zoroastrians considered it again to be the embodiment of Aru Mazda, and again it's managed 24 hours a day, every day of the year. The priests of Zoroastrians, who are called um, Herbards, sorry, cannot let it burn out. The fire must continuously burn. So they're priests right now, as Zoroastrian traditions, who are keeping the fire burning all day long. Zoroastrians believe that this holy flame is that which protects the entire world from the complete conquest by darkness and evil. And it will be from this flame that Ahura Mazda will purify the world once again. Thus, it is why the fire is revered in Zoroastrian literature, why it's revered in Zoroastrian communities and in their temples, and is considered and called the victorious flame. Because eventually, fire will burn out evil. Eventually, enough fire, will illuminate the entire world, and with illumination removes all elements of darkness. Fire also symbolizes knowledge within Zoroastrian tradition, so enough knowledge, the greater the knowledge, will replace all ignorance. But not all fire temples have this special flame, the Ashtabaram, um, as this holy fire is to be kept in a specialized fire temple that's called an Adanaran. Adanaran, and these Adanarans are located in very high places, such on very high mountains or high hilltops that overlook a wide area, because they function like lighthouses. So lighthouses work because they're up in high places where you can see them for miles and miles and miles and miles. So it's a similar concept here, that these adarans function as lighthouses in isolated areas of high places so they can light the world. Historically, the oldest of the Ashta Baram is located in Yazid, Iran, and it is believed to have remained aflamed, never burnt out, continuously burning without interruption since the 5th century CE. That's very impressive, if true, that it has stayed burning for almost 3,000 years. Incredible. Well, over 2,000 years, sorry, but incredible. But due to recent persecutions against Zoroastrians, 9 Ashta Barim have been constructed in other areas of the Zoroastrian diaspora. So primarily they exist in India, and there's some that exist here in North America. But the most famous of them all is in Yazid, Iran, which is the kind of defunct homeland, home city, home base of Zoroastrianism today. In Zoroastrianism, also water, as well as fire, are agents of ritual purity and are considered the basis of ritual life. In Zoroastrianism, both water and fire are essential elements for creation. That's how creation was made, was through fire and through water, and that it's fire and water that continues to give life-sustaining substance to not only the world, as well as to us. Both water and fire are representatives and are active parts within a fire temple. Zoroastrians usually pray in the presence of some form of fire, and before they pray, they purify themselves with water. And Zoroastrians consider fire as a medium in which spiritual insight and wisdom can be gained. So Zoroastrians often are confused with being fire worshippers. and that's why it's led to some persecution and misunderstandings. Central to, or let me rephrase that, the central ritual within Zoroastrianism is the yasana, which is also a segment of the Avesta, if you remember. The yasna, which is a recitation of a section of the Avesta, and it's a sacrificial ceremony involving a special drink known as um, Haemon or Hema. Hema is considered a divine plant within Zoroastrianism and is used in a variety of rituals. This plant is said to have been created by Ahura Mazda and is believed to have a variety of beneficial properties, including promotion of good health or increased fertility rates, or even giving one immortality. This specialized plant is prepared by priests. The plant is first pounded into the special paste, and then it's mixed with milk and water and other ingredients that becomes this yogurt-like drink. And that the mixture is then strained out and then drunk by participants. The origins of this drink actually predate Zoroastrianism and is well attested in ancient Iranian religion, as well as this same drink is attested to in the old Vedic religion, as well as in India. And actually one of the gods of the Vedic religion is known as Hemona, who is known for his special drink that grants one immortality. Two more important rituals that I want to lament here is a very important one is that of Najoti. Najoti, which is also known as Sari Pushi, is an initiation ceremony for Zoroastrian children as it marks a transition from a child to adulthood. And so, what this tradition involves is a special time when a child is to learn about their faith and to make a commitment to living according to the principles of their religion. The Najoti ceremony is typically performed when the child has reached anywhere between the age of 7 and 13. The ceremony is performed by a Zoroastrian priest, and it takes place inside a fire temple or sometimes also in other sacred areas or sacred spaces. The ceremony begins with the child being ritually bathed and then being ritually dressed again in new white clothes. The child then recites um, sections of Holy Scripture as well as praise, stylized Zoroastrian prayers. And then the priest gives the child a special item, what is known as kusti, a kusti, which is this kind of special rope or a special belt that the child then ties around his waist. This item, this belt, this kushti, is a symbol of purity as well as a symbol of commitment to the Zoroastrian faith. And this kusti is made from 7 strands of wool, which represents the 7 emanations of Ahura Mazda. The child then recites more scripture and then finally takes part in a ceremony which he's presented a specialized shirt known as a sundari. The sundari is made out of white cotton or white linen as to symbolize not only purity but protection. And the sunji is worn by Zoroastrians of all ages during special ceremonies within their life, and is remembered as a living reminder of their commitment to their faith. Zoroastrians also have unique funeral rites and burial practices that are also vital to their religion and to their culture that has drawn some peculiarities and some eyes at them. Zoroastrians are famous for their tradition of exposing or physically laying out a dead body in a sacred area that is called the Tower of Silence. So that's quite literally what they do, is that when a person dies, they lay the person's body for a time period. I think it's about a year, if not more, in a special built building in which the body naturally decomposes. The reason for this is that Zoroastrians believe that as soon as the breath or the soul leaves the body, that the body then is instantly impure. Because Zoroastrian believes that death is the function, is the work of Angra Mani. And so, as a way to purify, let me back up as well. As I said, yeah, death is considered an action by Angra Manu. Therefore, because the body is dead and deceased, Zoroastrians believe they have a responsibility not to contaminate the earth. The earth is considered beautiful and is considered a pure work of Ahura Mazda. And so thus allowing this a body to be naturally buried in the earth without any kind of impurities taken away would contaminate the earth. Would contaminate the soil, would contaminate the air, would contaminate the fire, would contaminate the waters with decaying matter, such as that of the corpse. So it's considered a religious sacrilege to bury somebody in the ground. So thus, instead of burying a corpse, Zoroastrianism traditionally lay out the body of a deceased person in a specialized purpose-built tower known as a dokma, or in English we call it the Tower of Silence, where the body is to be exposed to the sun until it's all flesh is deteriorated away, or allow nature for the birds of the air to come and like vultures to pick the flesh off the bones. That once the body is now of the deceased person reduced to nothing but being bones, the bones are then collected and they are cremated, thus reducing its level of spiritual pollution. So these dokmas are very popular in certain areas of Iran and in India. However, because of the religious persecution and intolerance growing in Iran and in India to the Zoroastrians, and because of this practice is quite unique of allowing a dead body to be exposed to the nature and to the elements in this special building that is open to the elements. So it stinks in a sense. People misunderstand them. So now, pretty much like here in the United States, Zoroastrians instead just cremate the body and aren't allowed to construct dokmas. But still, again, in India, you can still go and see traditional towers of silence there among certain prominent Zoroastrian communities. Finally, Zoroastrians are encouraged to pray 5 times a day, a tradition Muslims took from Zoroastrians, and are to maintain and celebrate the various religious holidays associated with the Zoroastrian calendar. And those holidays can differ from community to community. However, Zoroastrians, when they pray, their prayers are called mantras, so similar to mantras, but their prayers, mantras, are conducted usually with their hands outstretched to imitate how Zoroastrian taught his followers to pray, as well as that which is described in the Gathas. And by the positioning of their hands reflects their desire for supplication, that their hands are outstretched open to receive a blessing. Devoted Zoroastrians are also known to cover their heads while they pray, wearing this traditional hat called topi, as you can see by the priests there, or scarves or other headwear that they'll use. Or sometimes just they will, if they don't have anything, they'll cover their head with their hands. However, full coverage and veiling of women is traditionally an Islamic practice that's not a part of Zoroastrian traditions. And so Zoroastrian women in Iran do not wear head coverings, and do not cover their faces. However, the government does mandate it and force it. So now this is something that goes against their tradition, but now is being enforced upon their tradition. So the last thing that I want to cover for our lecture is just to give you a brief history, a kind of survey of Zoroastrian, where it began to where it is today. Uh, Zoroastrian enters the records of history around the middle 5th century BCE with the famous writings of the Greek historian Herodotus, and particularly his famed history book known just simply as the Histories, which include a lot of our best known descriptions and information about the ancient Persian people, and particularly the Persian Empire and greater Persian society at the time of Herodotus. So again, mid 5th century, so this is 450 BCE. According to Herodotus, Zoroastrianism was an established religion of the various Persian tribes and kingdom that was overseen by a group of priests and scholars who were known as the Magi. So this is the exact same Magi that is mentioned in the gospel stories who visit Jesus that we sing about in our Christmas carols, the three wise men or the three kings. Um, and following the unification of the Median and Persian empires in 550 BCE, Herodotus reports that both Cyrus the Great and later his successor, Cambius II, began to curtail the powers of the Magi after they had attempted to sow dissent following the loss of their influence. In 522 BCE, due to Cambius's failure to conquer Egypt, the Magi revolted against the emperor and set up a rival claimant to the throne, a usurper pretending to be Cyrus's younger son, named Sermida, Serdis, Smerdis. Also, I think in other traditions he's known as Baryida. However, according to both Greek and Persian sources, Darius the First would eventually kill this usurper and would take the throne for himself. And according to Persian sources, Darius would soon commit, or sorry, Darius was a very committed follower of Zoroastrianism and helped to expand its influence throughout the empire, and in fact, creating it and establishing it as a state religion of the empire. Zoroastrianism would be was the religion of the Persian Empire until its fall to the hands of Alexander the Great and the Macedonians in 320 or 332 BCE. Alexander's conquest largely displaced Zoroastrianism with Hellenistic beliefs and practices, though the religion of Zoroastrianism continued to be practiced for many centuries following the demise of the ancient Persian kingdom. It's not until the end of the Parthian period that we see Zoroastrian would receive renewed interest as a state religion of the ancient Persian people. And it was during the Parthian people period that a new religious movement emerged within Zoroastrianism that was called Zoroastrianism, which emphasized that enjoyed royal sanction during the Sassanid period. the Persian people. But no traces of this form of Zoroastrianism remains beyond the 10th century. Very quickly, Zoroastrianism uh, uh, was a fatalistic religious movement in which the supposed divinity Zuravan is the first principal primordial creator of the universe, but who is equal and opposite to Ahura Mazda and Angra Manu. And for our purposes here, I'm going to go really quickly with this, but that Zurvan is often portrayed as this transcendental, neutral God without passion, and one who uh, there was no distinction between good and evil. So you can see there's this kind of movement that's happening during this time, but ultimately, this period of Zoroastrianism fades away, and the Saracens, when they eventually um, reestablish themselves as an empire, as a great Persian empire that to rival that of the ancient Romans, began to aggressively promote Zoroastrianism as an alternative, not only to the culture of the Romans, but eventually when the Romans converted to Christianity, the Saracens uh, uh, started to evangelize and promote Zoroastrianism throughout Central Asia, throughout the Caucasus regions, and in parts of China as well. It was during this time, uh, 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 well, yeah. I guess I should mention this. Um, the reason they did this, the reason that they promoted this, like I already mentioned, was because of really the Roman Empire that is transitioning to the Byzantine Empire, and they were also because of Constantine the Great. Constantine the Great famously converts to Christianity, and then we start seeing Rome becoming more and more Christian. And so now there becomes a need to create an alternative of identity as Christians start invading into the Persian territories. So one way to combat this was that the Saracens began to promote Zoroastrianism more and more. But when Eastern Christians began to openly rebel against Rome and the Greeks, the Zoroastrians of the Saracens practiced religious tolerance for many Christian communities. And then they started opening the door and allowing Jews and Christians to come into their territories. So Zoroastrians, Christians, and Jews enjoyed a lot of freedom during this time in this part of the Persian Empire. But it was also during the Roman period that a new religious movement emerged in Persia that pulled various elements of Zoroastrianism into a tradition as well as Greek and Roman religious traditions, Christianity, Judaism, and possibly pulling elements of Buddhism as well because of the exposures as Iran, Persia is kind of the crossroads between India and China and the rest of the world. And so this new religious movement became known as Manichaeism. And so, really quickly, I want to talk about Manichaeism. Um, Manichaeism was a very popular religion in late antiquity with a demographic range that stretched all the way from North Africa into Italy for a long time, as well as to China and Mongolia. That some of our best manuscripts of the Manichaean religion actually comes from China and Mongolia. Manichaeism survived a very long time in the East. That Manichaeism didn't fade away until the 14th century, and now it's really much a dead religion. Manichaeism was founded by another Jewish Persian prophet whose name was Mani, who lived between 1216 and possibly, or not 1216, 216 to possibly 277 CE. And he taught an elaborate form of dualism, the struggle between good and evil, but also the struggle between the spiritual and the material world. Mani taught that humans existence is about fostering light while shunning out darkness. So again, Zoroastrianism here, that the light but this light, however, is gradually being removed from the world because of matter, and that the purpose of our existence is to return the world to the world of light from whence it came. So again, Zoroastrianism here. And like Zoroastrianism, Mani saw the human world as the human body, this battlefield in which cosmic forces are at work. Manichaeism taught that there was three creations, that at first there's good and evil existed in separate worlds. The world of light ruled by the Father, and the world of darkness ruled by the King of Darkness. And then at a certain point, the King of Darkness invaded the King of Light and started attacking it. The Father of Greatness sent his son, the original man, to battle and attack the powers of darkness, in which the original man and his army would fight for the forces in this ensnaring battle. And so you can see here, it's very complicated. I'm just going to stop there, but you can see there's elements of Zoroastrianism here, but you also see the Father sending his Son. There's elements of Christianity here, fighting the forces of good and evil. There's apocalyptic language here. I'm not going to go on and on talking about Manichaeism. However, I just wanted to mention that it was a very powerful religion that existed for a very long time, and actually started, and it led to some confusions between what are elements of Zoroastrianism and what are elements of other religions. Sorry. But by 651, most of the urban centers of the Sassanid Empire had come under the dominance of the Islamic forces. And in the beginning, during the Umayyad Caliphate, which the Umayyad Caliphate existed from 661 to 750 CE, there was little pressure or exertion on any of the new subject people to adopt Islam. And Zoroastrians were treated as dhimmiim. They were treated and subjugated to take the poll tax. And as long as they paid the poll tax, they were able to keep their religion and live in peace. However, with the change of leadership with the Abbasid Caliphate, and the Abbasid Caliphate went from 750 to 1258, Muslims in Iran, who now become the majority of the population in Iran and in Persia, began to show a severe disregard for and mistreatment for Zoroastrians. And the Abbasids began to slowly but steadily apply social and economic pressures to force the Zoroastrian communities to convert and give up on their tradition. But despite these economic and social incentives, meaning not have to pay the taxes, not having to pay special privileges to keep their religion, that they didn't have to pay taxes at all if they would just convert to religion of Islam. Zoroastrian remained strong in certain regions of Persia, particularly those in the furthest away from Baghdad. So in the very stretches like Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and parts of Pakistan and parts of Iran as well, forcing the government to take a more concentrated effort than before. So they tried economic incentives, they tried some economic pressures, that didn't work. Now the hurt came in. In the 8th century, you had the Islamic general Ali al-Bahili. Al-Bahili. He forced various Zoroastrian communities in Iran and Uzbekistan to convert to Islam by making their religion difficult in every which way possible, by turning their local fire temples into mosques, encouraging Zoroastrians to participate in mandatory Friday prayers, and forcing them to, if they didn't, they would have, or if they did go to these prayers, they would be given a government stipend, which helped to convert them. You had in the ninth century, there was various laws that were passed that regulated the behaviors of Zoroastrians, making it hard for them to practice their religion. You had in the 11th and 12th centuries the Iranian cities of Yazid and Kirman became the only government sanctioned cities in which Zoroastrians could live and worship freely in, so forcing Zoroastrians to relocate and congregate to very controlled areas. And they also passed laws that Zoroastrians could not migrate to these cities unless they were forced to convert to Islam or suffer economic and crippling taxes. You also had later during the Safavid Caliphate over Persia in the 16th century, Zoroastrians were branded as impure. In addition, they were being branded as infidels and forced to convert to Shia Islam or face imprisonment, face exile, or even face death. And then finally, you have the last kind of realm of this. In 1925, Zoroastrians were publicly forced to wear special clothing. Usually, they had to wear yellow clothing in order to distinguish them, and they were forbidden from wearing white clothing at all, which is very much a part of their religious culture. And they had to wear a distinguishing badge that made them easily identified when they were out in public. Zoroastrians were also were forbidden from wearing corrective glasses. They couldn't wear glasses. They couldn't even carry umbrellas. That they were to remain visually impaired and soaked when the rain came, unless they would convert to Islam. So weird practices, stuff like that. So many Zoroastrians, because they got tired of religious intolerations and persecutions, started to convert because their religion was dying. However, many Zoroastrians instead decided to flee to India, to the Indian subcontinent, where they have at least have been able to thrive for several centuries. While the majority of Indian Zoroastrians practice traditional forms of Zoroastrianism, as we know, nearly all Indian Zoroastrians combine Hindu elements of those traditions with their own. So many of the Indian Zoroastrians are vegans when their religion doesn't tell them to. And many Zoroastrians in India believe in reincarnation, which doesn't exist in Zoroastrianism. And so at the least the end of everything, because of this existence, because of their continual facing of religious intolerance in their traditional homelands, this religion is dying out. And particularly as Zoroastrians move to America, move to the UK, where there's lots of religious freedoms, you'll eventually see second and third generation Zoroastrians stop believing in the traditional beliefs of their systems and adopt either Christianity or adopt Islam. And so Zoroastrianism is what we refer to as a dying religion, a dying culture that needs to be preserved and needs to be saved. However, there is hope. There is hope that many Zoroastrians are thriving and thriving well because they are living in the diaspora, living in the United States, living in Canada, living in other countries like India. That is not their native homeland, but that allows them to continue their practices and continue their traditions.